Hey tribe, so here's another one of your dates with Dax. So 30 days of question and answer where I'm going to be producing 30 videos answering your deepest questions about pretty much any topic you want to ask around coaching, neuroscience, or even the business of being a coach, right? So I just want to be here and help you guys get what you need from being a member of the tribe. And hopefully kind of help you to join a few dots in areas that are causing you challenges or struggles, or heaven forbid, suffering. And so today's question is from Angie. So this is number 4, right? So Angie says, how can I break down the sciencey stuff to make it easy to understand for clients, and perhaps even more importantly, engaging for new prospects? Excuse me, I want to help them understand but not put them off by making it all sound complicated. Yeah, I get you. A lot of this, particularly when you start to dive into the neuroscience side of things, or even just kind of more conventional psychological perspectives, a lot of it can seem really confusing to clients, right? So thing one is start with the client's language. Like when you hear the client talk about stuff, when they say for example, when they're experiencing stress, use the term stress with them to begin with until you reassert like the new definition. So for example, through mind map, we talk about threat quite a lot, but meet them in the concept of stress, have a conversation with them, like bring out their definitions, right? And this is probably one of the most important things that we can do as coaches, is to make sure that we're speaking a common language. Because they say one thing, you hear something else. You say something, they hear something else. So we need to agree like a lexicon. We need to agree a language at the outset. And ultimately, the best language to use is the client's language, right? We know, hopefully as coaches, we know what we mean by a word that we're using. We also hopefully have a bit of an understanding about what they might mean. But it never hurts to clear that up. But what I would say is, usually professionally, we as coaches can work, across multiple kind of terms and definitions and kind of ideologies and stuff, because we certainly once you start to really establish your coaching practice, and when you start to establish the system for how you're going to deliver coaching, you kind of know what you mean, and that's the most important thing, right? Which means that you can meet them in their lexicon, you can meet them in their linguistic journey. So that's the first thing. Meet the client in their journey. Next, do feel okay, allow yourself the permission to talk about the science, but talk about the science in relation to specific struggles that a client is currently experiencing. So one of my ways in which I do that is that, I guess one of the phrases is, how, right? For example, so Mary, how pretty much, you already know what to do in terms of diet, and you already know what to do in terms of, nutrition and exercise and stuff. And yet you find yourself, you have a bad day and you find yourself with your head down in a tub of Haagen-Dazs, and kind of, afterwards you're all remorseful and you think, where the hell did that come from? I know that this is a bad thing for me to eat, and I still went ahead and did it, right? So in other words, I know what to do, but I just can't seem to get myself to do it, right? So Mary, you know how that? Oh yeah, that happens to me all the time. Great. So what the work I do does, is help people to understand why they're not doing what they know to do. For example, that's just one form of explanation. So how is a great place to meet clients in, right? Oh, you know how is kind of you can be going along really, really well, and something happens to you at work today and really, really pisses you off, or you get into an argument with your partner, and before you know it, all your best laid plans, you go kind of, even though the argument's got nothing to do with you going to the gym or being on the diet, you kind of go, screw it, I'm not going to the gym tonight, and you go and raid the fridge, right? How that kind of thing happens. And Mary, of course, she's going to say yes, because that's been Mary's experience. And you say, right, so what I do kind of helps explain why that happens. And would you like to know a little bit about it? All right. So a big part of the coaching system that I use is all about invitations. And so we invite Mary to, we don't just force the information. Oh, you know what? This is all because of that, and this is all because of that. And we don't meet the client in statements. We meet them in invitations. So would you like to hear more about that? Well, of course. If you just met Mary in her language, if you're in her lexicon, if she's kind of felt that you just hit the nail on the head for one of her experiences, and that's a big part of this, right? Well, if you just hit the nail on the head from one of her experiences, do you think she's going to say, "No, I don't want to hear that"? of course she's going to say yes. So she's already open, she's already receptive, and in fact, she's kind of leaning forward into you and kind of saying, well, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. Because you clearly seem to understand this. You clearly seem to have an answer and understanding of what's going on here. Right? So meet your clients and meet your prospects in their stories and in their experiences. And that then becomes the most important aspect of this whole thing, really, this whole coaching thing, right? Is meeting the client in their journey, telling them the story, and, kind of putting them, you could say putting them on tenterhooks, like, how that happens and da-da-da. And have you ever wondered why that's the case? Yeah, I'm always thinking about that. Like, what the hell's wrong with me? Well, actually, you realise that, Mary, that there's actually nothing wrong with you. It's a normal brain reaction. It's actually how the brain was wired. Really? Would you like to know more about it? I can tell you a bit more. And now we start going into prefrontal cortex, right? And I put the name out. Well, look, Mary, there's this part of the brain here, right, called the prefrontal cortex. I could bore you with it, and and that's not my intention. So let me just tell you a couple of things about it. First off, every goal you've got is right here in the right prefrontal cortex. I mean, everything that you're trying to accomplish, everything that doesn't yet exist but that you want to. In other words, every goal is here, and your logic is kind of here, right? Kind of all the aspect of making things happen and staying on track, and what most people would call willpower and stuff. That's all over here, right? So that all of this area is the part that's responsible for getting you to where you want to go. Now, the really interesting thing is that when you get stressed, overwhelmed, burned out, frustrated, emotional, the very first things that happen is that this part of the brain ramps down and you go back to other parts, and these other parts take over different behaviors. They run the show, right? Mary's listening because, again, that has been her experience. Like, she's going along happily today. Suddenly she's like, what the hell happened, right? I was having a really, really good day. Something happened. I come in the door, kind of got some bad news, or got laid off at work, or had an argument with my husband, or someone put a ding in the car as I was driving home, or whatever it happens to be. And now I'm pissed off. And now all the things that were really important to me are gone. And this person has just explained to me exactly why. So how is a really powerful one. Meeting them in their language, creating invitations, and keeping it. Once you've dropped in, if you want to put it that way, the big words, the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex and the amygdala and all this kind of stuff, once you drop it in, connect that to a kind of a simpler framework, right? So kind of, when I'm talking, when I first explain this, right prefrontal cortex, creativity, future, all that kind of stuff. Left prefrontal cortex, all about the joining the dots and working out the strategy and kind of taking the steps and willpower and all that kind of thing, right? Well, whenever I'm talking to Mary now, from this point forward, I keep reminding her. So all that creativity, all that forward thinking is gone, and all that kind of the ability to connect the dots and take the right steps, that's out the window as well. Right? I don't have to keep saying prefrontal cortex, prefrontal cortex, prefrontal. I don't have to science her out and all that kind of thing. Every now and then I might drop the terms in there. But the most important thing is that she's relating this concept. It's more of a concept, more of an idea, rather than a labeling system. Like, I need to label each area of the brain, right? Does that make sense? So hopefully that does. And in exactly the same way, you can kind of, you talk to them about the amygdala, for example, and as you describe the amygdala, what you say is actually it's a bit like a fire alarm, right? It's got a detector, and then it's got the actual kind of BP alarm part, right? So what your amygdala is doing all the time is looking for threats, and once those threats go off, it sets off an alarm. And what are the alarms? Well, you feel emotional, or you're going to fight, flight, and freeze. And here's, if that's a bit confusing, well, let me tell you what fight looks like. Let me tell you what freeze looks like. And the client is suddenly going, oh my gosh, I get it. Probably for the first time ever, they really, really come to understand it, right? So it's about proactive storytelling, but also you could say responsive storytelling. The client, so now you're asking questions about, like, Mary, have you ever experienced that? Or have you ever had a day like that where you were feeling really good and then something's knocked you off? Would you like to hear why that happens? Have you ever had one of those days, like, kind of where, sometimes you go, somebody is crappy to you, somebody's shitty to you, and you launch into a fury at them. But then there's other people that are shitty to you, and you back off and you leave it alone. There's other times that you're just all inside of your own head. You don't say anything, but you kind of, you spend the entire day kind of struggling with, well, let me tell you about that. And Mary, of course, is going to have had all of these experiences. So we don't teach science in isolation, because one of the things, for example, with mind map, one of the things that we come to understand is that literally everything is a skill. Right? Everything is a skill. Your ability to stay on track at times of stress, your ability to stick with that diet, your ability to continually kind of put out the quality and the quantity of work required to build up your business, all that kind of stuff. It's all a skill, which means that skills are improved by repetition, but they're also improved by kind of emotional connection and all this kind of stuff, right? And once those skills get adapted and adopted, they get embedded into the basal ganglia, but there are specific things that need to happen there. So we're not going to have a real deep conversation about the basal ganglia. What we're going to talk about is why things get habituated and what stops the habits from forming, and why it is that whenever you're using willpower, for example, you always get rammed back into kind of an old behavior eventually, right? The more willpower you use, the more likely you are to not be able to habituate the new thing. Most people don't understand that, right? And yet as soon as you explain it to them from the perspective of, kind of willpower means basically doing shit you don't want to do, right? Forcing yourself to do stuff that you really don't want to do, and that the brain doesn't work that way. The brain isn't going to be bullied into taking an action it doesn't want to do. It's always going to find the path of least resistance. Well, clients, again, they're going to understand, they're going to appreciate that. But I hope you're getting the kind of picture here. It's all about storytelling. It's all about linguistics. It's all about sharing your information, but relative to their own experiences. Okay, so we never share information just for information's sake. We share information relative to something that they've already experienced, or tell me something that you're struggling with at the moment, Mary, right? And she tells you, and you say, so why do you think that happens? I haven't got a bloody clue. It seems I get so far, and as soon as I get this far, I end up rebounding all the way back. Okay, would you like to kind of hear a few things that are going on in the brain that might be responsible for that, right? Or Mary told you that she's so pissed off with herself because she feels like she's I'm sick of it. I always self-sabotage. I just get ahead and I start to self-sabotage. Well, actually, Mary, self-sabotage doesn't actually exist from a brain perspective. There's a whole bunch of other things going on that actually feel a bit like self-sabotage, but the reality is there's something else going on, and that something else is designed to protect you. Would you like to hear a bit about that? Mary's all ears, of course. You see how it works. Meet the client in their struggle, meet the client in their story, connect your science to the story and experience they're already having, and do it in such a way, like using, how this happens, how that went. Has this ever happened to you? Did you ever have that experience? Yes, of course I did. Boom. Right, Mary is now listening, she's all ears, and she's actively engaged. You're probably going to be the first person in her life who's telling her the true story of what's happening at a brain level, rather than the kind of the superficial psychological story of you've got to try harder, you've got to use more willpower, you're self-sabotaging, you're weak-willed, and all the rest of it. There's also another part of this, right? Kind of that people tend to want, they want to hear the stuff that is absolving them of blame and all that kind of stuff. So it all ties into that as well. So it's brilliant. Now, this doesn't mean that they're not responsible. The client is absolutely 100% responsible, but they're not at blame. They're not at fault here. It's a new skill that they need to learn, and that's another part of the story. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. Rambled about a little bit there and kind of took you around the houses, but I hope that makes sense, Angie. And likewise, if anyone's got any other questions related to this, or even if you've got comments, and you don't have to be in agreement with me. You might want to challenge what I just said there. That's absolutely fine. I'm not coming on here to do these videos to tell you that I'm all right and you're all wrong, and kind of you better listen to me. I'm open to dialogue here, but hopefully you found that interesting, and I'd love to hear your feedback on it. Till next time, take care.